Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the April 2023 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook and discussion of Differences in the European Labor Movement by Lenin from 1910. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So this piece was published in Zvezda number 1, December 16, 1910, and signed V. Ilyin. It's published here according to that text in Zvezda. The source is Lenin Collected Works, Progress Publishers, 1974, Moscow, Volume 16. HTML transcription and markup by R. Simbala, and it's online at the Lenin Internet Archive within the Marxists Internet Archive, Marxists.org. Thanks as usual to MIA for hosting this and thousands of other free Marxist texts. So we begin with an editorial note explaining some of the background here. The article, Differences in the European Labor Movement, was published in number 4 of the newspaper Zvezda, the Star, in the section entitled Letters from Abroad. Zvezda was a Bolshevik legal newspaper. It was the predecessor of Pravda, and it was issued in St. Petersburg from December 16, 1910, so this was in the inaugural issue, to April 22, 1912. At first, it was a weekly, and then from January 1912, it was a twice-weekly paper, then from March, 3 times a week. On February 26, 1912, there appeared simultaneously with Zvezda the first issue of Nevskaya Zvezda, which became the continuation of Zvezda after the latter had been closed down. The last, 27th issue of Nevskaya Zvezda was published on October 5, 1912. Contributors to Zvezda were N.N. Baturin, K.S. Yeremeyev, V.M. Molotov, M.S. Olminsky, N.G. Poletayev, J.V. Stalin, and also A.M. Gorky. Until the autumn of 1911, pro-party Mensheviks, Plekhanovites, participated in Zvezda. The ideological leadership of the newspaper was carried out from abroad by Lenin, who published in it and in Nevskaya Zvezda about 50 articles. The legal newspaper Zvezda, directed by Lenin, was a militant Bolshevik organ which upheld the program of the illegal party. Zvezda established permanent close ties with the workers and devoted an extensive section to workers' correspondence. The circulation of individual issues reached 50,000 to 60,000. The newspaper suffered continual persecution by the government. Out of 96 issues of Zvezda and Nevskaya Zvezda, 39 were confiscated, and 10 were subjected to fines. Zvezda prepared the way for the publication of the Bolshevik daily newspaper Pravda, and was closed down on the day that Pravda appeared. So that's some background on Zvezda. Now let's get into the audiobook. The principal tactical differences in the present-day labor movement of Europe and America reduce themselves to a struggle against 2 big trends that are departing from Marxism, which has in fact become the dominant theory in this movement. These 2 trends are revisionism, such as opportunism and reformism, and anarchism, anarcho-syndicalism, anarcho-socialism. Quick comment here, we were just talking about in one of the last live streams, like maybe the last live stream we just did a couple of days ago, what you find in the U.S. left, or at least among people who call themselves left, is lots of Democrats, lots of anarchists. And then, thanks to the LaRouche people, now some, quote, MAGA communists as well, who are calling themselves, Marxist, but are actually Republican, libertarian, fascist. Obviously, we're trying to increase the proportion of actual Marxists by putting out this broad-based agitation and education that we do here at the channel and that similar channels do, in the hopes that people will be enticed to form study groups, clubs, and other things on the way to forming the party that we actually need. But clearly, this text will be relevant to today's struggles as well. Continuing, both of these departures from the Marxist theory and Marxist tactics that are dominant in the labor movement were to be observed in various forms and in various shades in all civilized countries during the more than half-century of history of the mass labor movement. This fact alone shows that these departures cannot be attributed to accident, or to the mistakes of individuals or groups, or even to the influence of national characteristics and traditions, and so forth. There must be some deep-rooted causes in the economic system and in the character of the development of all capitalist countries, which constantly give rise to these departures from Marxism. A small book, The Tactical Differences in the Labor Movement, published last year, 1909, by a Dutch Marxist, Anton Pannekoek, represents an interesting attempt at a scientific investigation of these causes. In our exposition, we shall acquaint the reader with Pannekoek's conclusions, which, it must be recognized, are quite correct. One of the most profound causes that periodically give rise to differences over tactics is the very growth of the labor movement. If this movement is not measured by the criterion of some fantastic ideal, but is regarded as the practical movement of ordinary people, it will be clear that the enlistment of larger and larger numbers of new recruits, the attraction of new sections of the working people, must be inevitably accompanied by waverings in the sphere of theory and tactics, by repetitions of old mistakes, by a temporary reversion to antiquated views and antiquated methods, and so forth. The labor movement of every country periodically spends a varying amount of energy, attention, and time on the, quote, training of newcomers. Furthermore, the rate at which capitalism develops varies in different countries and in different spheres of the national economy. Marxism is most easily, rapidly, completely, and lastingly assimilated by the working class and its ideologists where large-scale industry is most developed. Economic relations which are backward or which lag in their development constantly lead to the appearance of supporters of the labor movement who assimilate only certain aspects of Marxism, only certain parts of the New World outlook, or individual slogans and demands, being unable to make a determined break with all of the traditions of the bourgeois world outlook in general and the bourgeois democratic world outlook in particular. Again, a constant source of differences is the dialectical nature of social development, which proceeds in contradictions and through contradictions. Capitalism is progressive because it destroys the old methods of production and develops productive forces, yet at the same time, at a certain stage of development, it retards the growth of productive forces, holds them back. It develops, organizes, and disciplines the workers, and it crushes, oppresses, leads to degeneration, poverty, etc. Capitalism creates its own gravedigger, itself creates the elements of a new system, yet at the same time, without a leap, these individual elements change nothing in the general state of affairs and do not affect the rule of capital. This leap is, of course, a proletarian revolution. It is Marxism, the theory of dialectical materialism, that is able to encompass these contradictions of living reality, of the living history of capitalism and the working class movement. But needless to say, the masses learn from life and not from books, and therefore certain individuals or groups constantly exaggerate, elevate to a one-sided theory, to a one-sided system of tactics, now one and now another feature of capitalist development, now one and now another lesson of this development. Bourgeois ideologists, liberals and Democrats, not understanding Marxism and not understanding the modern labor movement, are constantly jumping from one futile extreme to another. At one time, they explain the whole matter by asserting that evil-minded persons, quote, incite class against class. At another, they console themselves with the idea that the Workers' Party is, quote, a peaceful party of reform. Both anarcho-syndicalism and reformism must be regarded as a direct product of this bourgeois world outlook and its influence. Let's say that again. Both anarcho-syndicalism and reformism must be regarded as a direct product of this bourgeois world outlook and its significance. They seize upon one aspect of the labor movement, elevate one-sidedness to a theory, and declare mutually exclusive those tendencies or features of this movement that are a specific peculiarity of a given period, of given conditions of working class activity. But real life, real history, includes these different tendencies, just as life and development in nature include both slow evolution and rapid leaps, breaks in continuity. The revisionists regard as phrasemongering all arguments about leaps, and about the working class movement being antagonistic in principle to the whole of the old society. They regard reforms as a partial realization of socialism. The anarcho-syndicalists reject, quote, petty work, especially the utilization of the parliamentary platform. In practice, the latter tactics amount to waiting for great days, along with an inability to muster the forces which create great events. Both of them hinder the thing that is most important and most urgent, namely, to unite the workers in big, powerful, and properly functioning organizations, capable of functioning well under all circumstances, good and bad, great and petty, I would add, permeated with the spirit of the class struggle, clearly realizing their aims and trained in the true Marxist world outlook. We shall here permit ourselves a slight digression, and note in parenthesis so as to avoid possible misunderstandings, that Panakoic illustrates his analysis exclusively by examples taken from West European history, especially the history of Germany and France, not referring to Russia at all. If at times it seems that he is alluding to Russia, it is only because the basic tendencies which give rise to definite departures from Marxist tactics are to be observed in our country too, despite the vast difference between Russia and the West in culture, everyday life, and historical and economic development. Finally, an extremely important cause of differences among those taking part in the labor movement lies in changes in the tactics of the ruling classes in general and of the bourgeoisie in particular. If the tactics of the bourgeoisie were always uniform, or at least of the same kind, the working class would rapidly learn to reply to them by tactics just as uniform, or of the same kind. But as a matter of fact, in every country the bourgeoisie inevitably devises two systems of rule, two methods of fighting for its interests and of maintaining its domination. And these methods at times succeed each other, and at times are interwoven in various combinations. The first of these is the method of force, the method which rejects all concessions to the labor movement, the method of supporting all the old and obsolete institutions, the method of irreconcilably rejecting reforms. Such is the nature of the conservative policy, which in Western Europe is becoming less and less a policy of the landowning classes, and more one of the varieties of bourgeois policy in general. The second is the method of liberalism, of steps toward the development of political rights, toward reforms, concessions, and so forth. The bourgeoisie passes from one method to the other not because of the malicious intent of individuals, and not accidentally, but owing to the fundamentally contradictory nature of its own position. Normal capitalist society cannot develop successfully without a firmly established representative system, and without certain political rights for the population, which is bound to be distinguished by its relatively high, quote, cultural demands. These demands for a certain minimum of culture are created by the conditions of the capitalist mode of production itself, with its high technique, complexity, flexibility, mobility, rapid development of world competition, and so forth. In consequence, vacillations in the tactics of the bourgeoisie, transitions from the system of force to the system of apparent concessions, have been characteristic of the history of all European countries during the last half-century, the various countries developing primarily the application of the one method or the other at definite periods. For instance, in the 60s and 70s of the 19th century, Britain was the classical country of, quote, liberal bourgeois policy. Germany in the 70s and 80s adhered to the method of force, and so on. Quick comment here, I just want to point out, this is from 1910, so well before the New Deal in the USA, but you could argue that that was an example of the kind of change in policy that Lenin is describing. Continuing, when this method, the method of force, prevailed in Germany, a one-sided echo of this particular system of bourgeois government was the growth of anarcho-syndicalism, or anarchism as it was then called, in the labor movement, the Young at the beginning of the 90s, Johann Most at the beginning of the 80s. 2 footnotes there. The Young faction was a petty bourgeois, semi-anarchist group formed in the German Social Democratic Party in 1890 and composed chiefly of undergraduate students and young writers, hence the name. It put forward a platform that rejected any social democratic participation in parliament. They were expelled from the party by the Erfurt Congress in October 1891. Quick reminder here also, back in these days, social democracy was sort of the general name for Marxism at that time. So, German Social Democratic Party, there you go. Also, Johann Most, German Social Democrat. In 1880 at the Baden Congress, he was expelled from the party on account of his disorganizing behavior. In the 80s, he became an adherent of anarchism. Back to the main text. When in 1890 the change to concessions took place, this change, as is always the case, proved to be even more dangerous to the labor movement, and it gave rise to an equally one-sided echo of bourgeois reformism, opportunism in the labor movement. Quote, the positive, real aim of the liberal policy of the bourgeoisie, Panakoic says, is to mislead the workers, to cause a split in their ranks, to convert their policy into an impotent adjunct of an impotent, always impotent and ephemeral, sham reformism." Unquote. Not infrequently, the bourgeoisie for a certain time achieves its object by a liberal policy, which, as Panicoic justly remarks, is a more crafty policy. A part of the workers and a part of their representatives at times allow themselves to be deceived by these seeming concessions. The revisionists declare that the doctrine of the class struggle is antiquated, or they begin to conduct a policy which is in fact a renunciation of the class struggle. The zigzags of bourgeois tactics intensify revisionism within the labor movement, and not infrequently bring the differences within the labor movement to the point of an outright split. All causes of the kind indicated give rise to differences over tactics within the labor movement and within the proletarian ranks. But there is not and cannot be a Chinese wall between the proletariat and the sections of the petty bourgeoisie in contact with it, including the peasantry. It's clear that the passing of certain individuals, groups, and sections of the petty bourgeoisie into the ranks of the proletariat is bound, in its turn, to give rise to vacillations in the tactics of the latter. So comment, why is that? So basically, as sections of the petty bourgeoisie, well, as Lenin says, individuals, groups, and then whole sections of the petty bourgeoisie, specifically he's talking about the peasantry there, but could be other kinds of petty bourgeoisie as well, going into the proletariat, becoming, in their actual class status, proletarians, they're going to be bringing in that petty bourgeois mindset with them, and this will in turn give rise to vacillations in tactics. Okay. The experience of the labor movement of various countries helps us to understand, on the basis of concrete practical questions, the nature of Marxist tactics. It helps the younger countries to distinguish more clearly the true class significance of departures from Marxism and to combat these departures more successfully. That's the end of the audiobook. What do you think? Leave a question or comment below. We'll continue the discussion there as always. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. Every donation is encouraging. They're also materially helpful. I would make content even if no one supported, but all of the support allows me to spend a lot more time per week on what we're doing on the channel, the research, the preparation, the recording, the editing, the live streams, all of it, which is now all regular content on the channel. And again, that is thanks in large part to the patrons. Also, whether you're a patron or not, engagement counts. Like, share, subscribe, and that will help YouTube to recommend this content to more people. So it's an easy way to help out and to pass this message along to other workers who are trying to find answers to their questions about capitalism and class struggle who you might not even know personally. Then again, you might be referring this video indirectly to somebody who's in your workplace. And then when you try to form that union a year from now, who knows? All right, thanks again, and we will see you in the next video.